The last video had to do with dominance and subordination. This one has to do with rhythm. Rhythm within a composition involves kind of the timing and the spacing between your subjects. It's similar to music in that it's more syncopated. 4/4 time, I don't know how many of you are familiar with music, but 4/4 time has very steady beat. And this is obviously perfectly valid because most of our music is based on 4/4 time. But, well, not but it can be formal, it's very traditional, it's very soothing. You know, when I'm listening to music, when I paint, and if I need soothing move music, I will switch over to 4/4 time because I really don't have to pay extremely close attention to it. When I want something that's going to pick me up because I'm getting sleepy, because I haven't had enough caffeine, then what I'll choose is something with a more syncopated, which gives it a much more interesting feel to it. You know, I'm almost forced to listen to it. And that's in some ways very similar to what we're dealing with when we're trying to create rhythm within our composition. Yes, we can certainly have things that are equidistant, that are peaceful, calming, but if you're wanting something different, then you're going to want to definitely make sure that you have uneven amount of shapes, that you have curves, things that aren't parallel. You want to try and avoid things being parallel with one another. You want to have things going up and down or side to side where they're ending up at different spaces or different lengths. You want to make sure that your negative spaces is just constantly kind of doing this little dance so that it's not totally equidistant. Now, I've done some examples here, and I darkened this line. Now, this is, it's a valid composition, but it's not a very interesting composition. Everything is very, very equidistant. And also be aware of, with composition, you are intentionally guiding the viewer's eye around the composition. So with these 4 compositions, because they are set up like text, the viewer is automatically going to start reading it from left to right. So for this composition, when I look at it, I go left to right, left to right, left to right, left to right, and then I'm out of there because there is nothing to stop my eye. If I add in a little, let's say these are little sticks or a small log, and I don't know if you've ever seen any of those little teeny tiny little lichens that are blue. Well, if I add a blue, do you notice how you read through this but you stop here? If I remove that and add it right here, do you notice how you read through but you stop here and then you read through here? But this, at least to me, and composition is very, very subjective. So, you have to come at it from, this is my reading of it. But for me, this is not nearly so interesting as if I put it at a 2/3 position rather than in the middle. So be thinking thirds, not halves. With this particular composition, I added an additional line because this is even. This now becomes an uneven number. So you read here, and you slide down here, which is fun. It creates a visual interest. If I add, my little lichen right there, it stops your eye from falling all the way down. It stops it. If I add it right up here, it really doesn't add to the composition at all. If I were to add it right here, You go across and you go across, you slide around, down, and then you stop. So a lot of this has to do with your intent for what you want the viewer to be getting out of this. You know, for me, it's kind of fun to have it right here because it stops me from going downhill. But maybe you want people going downhill fast and then stopping right here. This particular composition is, let's see, 6, 7, so it's an uneven number. You have a lead in here. This is an entrance into your painting where the eye goes in. It starts right here and it drops here and it drops here and it drops here and it goes over a hump here and across here and right across here. If I was to extend this line, we now have a lead in and a lead out. Lead ins and lead outs are fine. They're perfectly valid way to do a composition. They're sometimes not so good because it can also too quickly, depending on how you've planned your composition, lead the viewer in and out too fast. So right now, to me, this is too fast. But if I were to add, you know, maybe a little mushroom here and another one like right here, and then maybe another one right here. Notice how these are not equidistant from each other. And again, it's an uneven number. If I was to add in another one, it kind of kills that syncopation of having 3. So those are just some things to be aware of. This one is really exceptionally boring because there is nothing going on between the positive shapes and the negative spaces. Here, you know, you've got all kinds of things going on between the positive and negative, positive shapes and negative spaces. They are interacting with each other. They are interlocked with each other. There is nothing locking these 3. And if I was to take this frame away, I want you to just notice, at least the frame gave it some kind of something, but now it is just simply 3 lines in space. This is one of those compositions which is a very big no-no. Even for harmonious painting, you've got, you know, something that's extremely balanced. You've got 3 flowers, all facing in the same direction, all the same length. Yes, you've got a little bit going on between the positive shapes and the negative spaces. They are interacting some, but it's very boring interaction. You definitely want to stay away from just having the 3 same flowers that are pretty much identical. There's nothing to that composition. This adds a little bit more interest to it because we've got things overlapping. We've got a curve. This, you know, if I added a stamen that came up here, this adds a good directional line up here. This area right here is the center of interest. Notice this is almost full on, but it is not quite face. You know, it's not a bullseye. This one is that nice little 3/4, and this is showing the back of the flower. This one again is basically this composition, but all spread out. And again, if I take out the frame, I mean, in some ways, taking away the frame can really tell you a lot about what's going on with your positive shapes and your negative spaces. So this is just simply 3 similar, almost exactly the same flowers just in a row. There's nothing happening in interacting between those positive shapes and negative spaces. Now, one thing I want to bring up, and we'll cover this more when we get into thumbnail sketches in the next class, is that the structure of your frame can create an emotional response in your viewer, and this can really help with playing with that rhythm, because this kind of a vertical is generally considered very, very exciting. So for this particular one, I hung a vine down, and I helped to accentuate that feeling of vine and space by adding additional white space here at the bottom. And I've tried hard to not have things equidistant, but having things a little bit staggered. You know, it's crossing the midline. We've got this one little baby leaf that's just starting to grow down here at the bottom. Now, if I was to take away that airspace down there at the bottom, do you see that kind of kills the composition? And I also want to show you, I'm going to add some more airspace to this again. If I crop this even more tightly, do you see how that even becomes more dynamic, having that severe vertical? Now for horizontal, this is like a cantaloupes in a field. So we've got this mass of leaves down here. And where you play with the syncopation and the rhythm is your ups and downs with where these leaves are going. You've got some coming up, you've got some extending out, you've got a leaf here, another leaf here, and then compare this to if I simply had something that was pretty much just horizontal. So this is where that, you know, you're paying attention to the positive and negative shapes. And rhythm doesn't have to be something huge between the shapes. It can be just something as simple as having leaves coming up and going down, but in an interesting manner rather than having them very, very, very formal and very, very spaced evenly together. All right, and the other thing I wanted to show you about this is that it's a little bit of a side. So if we take this pumpkin up to this, or cantaloupe up to this side, do you see how by having these the same size that your eye goes back and forth and it cannot stop? Before we turned this cantaloupe into the dominant shape, it is the center of interest because it's big. It's just bigger than this smaller one. But you still move over here and then come back up here, and you use these leaves to help guide the eye around and up and down to create something that's a little bit more interesting. With these examples, I have tried to make kind of a succession of subjects, and we're just going to call them oranges, just to kind of show you between, you know, having a very balanced composition and then something that's a little bit more syncopated, the differences that make visually, hopefully that you can see, between the two. So for this particular one, I have, you know, everything is pretty equidistant. Now this is a valid composition. You can see it definitely in a lot of compositions that are out there, a lot of paintings. Everything is fairly formal. They're equidistant. For me personally, because I tend to like things that are, you know, uneven, it's just not real interesting. You've got this fairly dead center. You know, I do have an uneven amount of shapes, but there's just nothing there that for me is very, very interesting. Now it could be, you know, if this is a really interesting fruit of some kind, that would make all the difference in the world. But with this one, you know, I've overlapped two of those oranges. So this now, rather than being dead center, is also off to the side. These are still very, very equidistant. I look at these, my eye goes back and forth between them. I do center around those two shapes. So this is more of my center of interest. These are just kind of hanging out there. This is again a valid composition. It just could be played with and tweaked a little bit more. This one, I've got these two overlapping, and I've got these three, so they're not equidistant at all, and it's similar to the one that was in the previous little short video. This one's way off to the side, and I think it's too close to the edge. So I'm going to take this out just a little bit. Yeah, that helps. This is, you still, you look here and you come back around and you go out to that one particular shape. This particular composition thumbnail, you've got this huge shape, so everything's cropped way too tight. You've got 2 points that are kissing. They're touching the edge of the frame. And kissing can also be like this, where they meet at this point so that you can't tell what's in front and what's in back. But so you want to avoid having these so close to the edge, because I look here, but then I also look here and I look here. And that's not something you want to do, because that has a tendency to make people feel uncomfortable when they're looking at the painting, really uncomfortable. And I hope that's something that you nurture within yourself, is that when you get too close to the edge of the frame, you start getting uncomfortable, okay? Just telling you. So with this one, it's a better composition. I've got shapes overlapping. They're not equidistant, they're still 5. And I personally like this one a lot better. With this particular one, I added additional shapes. So, and they're also offset. There's some, rather than have everything on the same level, things are going back in space and things that are coming forward in space. So for things that are going back in space, they tend to go higher up in your composition. Things that are coming forward in space, that are closer to you, they tend to be heading towards the bottom. So this particular orange would be closer to you, and this one would be much further back. Now for me, right now, the center of interest it tends to be here, but I do tend to bounce back and forth between those two shapes. Now if I was to add that one little dot, that becomes my center of interest, because it's the only little dot in there. So that's, if I add little dots all over, now we've got lots of little points, but it does tend to pull your eye around. Do you notice how your eye starts bouncing? But if I was to turn this particular one into something different, notice how your eye immediately goes to that one shape that is so different from all the other shapes. So you can see rhythm is playing a shape. Rhythm is playing with the subjects in this, as well as dominance and subordination, because we do have this one large shape and a lot of subordinate smaller shapes, but we're also playing with texture and size relationships and all that good stuff. So there's a lot to be thinking about within a composition.